priceless painting could make rich men smile, but a single wrong step beneath the glass roof of the Metropolitan Museum could turn New York's most feared Mafia king into a beautiful corpse before dessert was served. The opening night of the private auction was supposed to be elegant. Champagne moved through the gallery in crystal flutes. Diamonds flashed beneath soft golden lights. Politicians laughed with donors they pretended not to owe favors to, while old money families stood close to criminal bloodlines and called it charity. The museum looked peaceful from the outside, grand and glowing against the night. But inside those marble walls, the city's underworld had gathered under velvet ropes and priceless frames. No one raised a weapon. No one shouted a threat. That was the rule of neutral ground. But the silence carried its own danger, because every smile in the room had a blade hidden behind it. Dante Moretti stood near the center of the main gallery, as if the entire museum had been built around him. He wore a black tailored suit, crisp and clean, with no jewelry except a heavy watch that looked less like wealth and more like a warning. His dark hair was brushed back from a face that could make powerful men forget what they meant to say. Around him stood senators, bankers, gallery owners, and men who had ordered murders over dinner and slept well afterward. They all watched Dante without looking like they were watching him. That was how fear behaved in expensive rooms. It stayed polite. It sipped champagne. It laughed softly at jokes it did not understand. But it always kept one eye on the man who could end a career, a bloodline, or a city block with a quiet nod. Across the gallery, near a display of old European portraits, Mara Voss watched everything, without seeming to watch anything. She had learned long ago that people showed the truth when they believed you were only background. Most of the room saw her as Dante's financial strategist, the woman who cleaned up the numbers, examined invoices, studied museum donations, and found the tiny cracks where stolen money liked to hide. Some knew she was also an art fraud specialist, sharp enough to tell a real masterwork from a clever lie before the paint had fully dried. But even those who respected her mind still made the same foolish mistake. They looked at her soft body, her full arms, her heavy hips, the way her deep burgundy gown held her curves with quiet confidence, and they thought softness meant weakness. Mara had built her entire life around letting people be wrong. She did not hide at the edge of the auction because she was afraid. She stood there because the edge gave her the whole room. From that place she could see the donors drifting in shining clusters, the museum guards pretending not to know which guests had criminal records, and the waiters moving through gaps in the crowd with trays held high. She could see the Belandi cousins near the sculpture wing, dressed in mourning black, though no one had died yet. She could see a federal judge laughing too loudly beside a man who had once burned evidence for the Moretti family. And she could see Carlo Renzi, Dante's trusted lieutenant, moving with just enough purpose to wake a cold feeling in the back of her mind. Carlo had been with Dante for years. He was handsome, in a polished, forgettable way, with silver at his temples and a smile that never reached his eyes. Men like Carlo survive by looking loyal from a distance. Mara had never liked him. She did not trust people whose charm landed too smoothly, like a coin always falling on the side they chose. Tonight, Carlo kept touching Dante's elbow, guiding him a few steps here, a few steps there, laughing as if sharing some private comment about the art. To anyone else it looked natural. To Mara it looked measured. Dante's usual security ring had shifted too. His left side was open. His rear guard was farther away than normal. One of his youngest men stood near the north entrance, where an older guard should have been. Tiny changes, tiny cracks. The kind people ignored until the floor broke beneath them. The auctioneer's voice rose warmly from the front of the room, inviting the first round of bids on a pale landscape in a gilded frame. A hum of wealth moved through the gallery. Cards lifted, heads tilted. Soft laughter drifted above the music. Mara's eyes moved from the painting to the ceiling, then to the waiters, then to Dante's hand. A server had just appeared from the wrong service entrance carrying a low silver tray with one glass on it. Dante's whiskey, dark amber, no ice, a thin twist of orange peel, exactly how he preferred it. Mara felt something inside her go still. The waiter was too calm, the tray was too steady, the route was wrong. Museum staff had been trained to enter from the east corridor during auction service, because the west door crossed the camera blind spot near the restoration hall. Mara knew that because she had audited the museum's insurance records 2 years earlier, during a quiet investigation into missing Dutch sketches that had been misplaced for nearly a decade. She remembered every floor plan, every service path, every locked storage room that was only locked on paper, and the man carrying Dante's drink had entered through a door he should not have been able to open. A second later, the lights flickered. It was so brief, most people only blinked. The music continued. The auctioneer made a small joke about old buildings having moods, and the donors laughed because rich people loved being reassured that danger was only atmosphere. But Mara saw the security panel above the archway flash red, then green. She saw a museum technician glance at his tablet and frown. She saw one of Carlo's men take half a step back from the center of the gallery. Above Dante, high in the ceiling, the massive glass skylight caught the glow of the city beyond it. Beautiful, clear, heavy enough to turn a man into memory. Mara's pulse slowed instead of quickening. That was how her fear worked. It sharpened her. It pulled the room into lines and angles, into patterns and probabilities. Poison in the whiskey. A rigged skylight. Security moved out of position. Carlo guiding Dante beneath the drop point. Panic after the glass fell. A tragic accident in a room full of witnesses. In the confusion, Carlo's men would finish anything the poison and falling glass did not. Dante Moretti would die under the eyes of New York's elite, and by morning, every newspaper would call it a shocking museum disaster. Mara looked at Dante. He was reaching for the glass. She could not shout. Carlo was watching her now. Not directly. Never directly. His gaze moved past her shoulder, then returned to Dante, but she saw the slight tightening at the edge of his mouth. He knew she had noticed something. If she caused panic too soon, the trap might close early. If she ran to Dante, Carlo would move. If she did nothing, the man she had served, challenged, and secretly admired would be dead before the next painting was sold. The auctioneer lifted his hand toward the next piece, a dark, dramatic portrait of a woman in black silk, standing beside a stormy sea. Dante stood only a few feet from it, whiskey almost in hand. Carlo smiling beside him, like the faithful friend in a funeral painting. Mara moved before the last doubt could touch her. She stepped away from the wall and walked straight into the open space beneath the lights. Her burgundy gown swept softly around her legs. Conversations dipped as people turned. Mara knew what they saw. A fat woman stepping out where she was not expected. A woman too bold for the edge she had been assigned. A woman with a calm face and dangerous eyes. She did not rush. Rushing would look like fear. She crossed the polished floor like she had bought the museum itself and simply forgotten to tell anyone. The auctioneer faltered when he saw her hand rise. The number she gave was so high, the room seemed to inhale at once. A ripple went through the gallery. Heads turned fully now. Donors whispered. Reporters near the back lifted their phones. The auctioneer stared as if he had misunderstood, then repeated the amount in a voice that shook with delight and confusion. Mara kept her eyes on the painting, not Dante, though she felt his attention land on her with the weight of a closed fist. Dante Moretti did not like surprises. He liked control. He liked rooms that bent around him. His expression hardened as Mara stepped close enough for his men to shift their stance, and for Carlo's smile to thin. To the room, Mara looked like she was inspecting the painting she had just tried to claim. She leaned slightly toward the frame, studying the brushwork, the varnish, the small craquelure near the woman's throat. Then, without moving her lips more than necessary, she spoke low enough that only Dante could hear. "Do not drink that whiskey, and do not look up." Dante went very still. His hand froze inches from the glass. For one breath, his fury was almost physical. No one gave him orders in public. No one embarrassed him in front of rivals and senators and old thieves wearing charity pins. Mara felt that anger roll off him, dark and hot, but she did not step back. She kept her eyes on the portrait. "Carlo has turned on you," she said softly. "Your security has been moved. The west service door is compromised. The skylight above you is rigged to break. The drink is poisoned. Stay angry if you need to, but stay alive first." The anger in Dante's face changed. It did not disappear, it sharpened into something colder. His eyes flicked once to the glass, then to Carlo, then to the ceiling, without fully lifting his head. Mara could almost feel the moment he understood. She was not nervous, she was not guessing, she was doing what no one in his own circle had done. She was saving his life in a room where every visible exit had already been turned into a trap. Carlo approached with a polite smile that made Mara's skin crawl. "Is there a problem with the painting?" he asked, smooth as cream over broken glass. Mara turned to him, with a look so calm it felt almost gentle. "Yes," she said, loud enough now for the people nearby to hear. "There is a very serious problem with the painting." The auctioneer blinked. A woman in diamonds gasped softly. Dante turned toward Mara, his face unreadable, and in that instant, she gave him the only path out. She lifted her voice, letting it carry across the gallery, with just enough force to gather the room, without sounding frightened. "This piece is not what the catalogue says it is." The whisper that moved through the museum was immediate and hungry. Nothing excited rich people like scandal, especially when they believed it belonged to someone else. The auctioneer's smile collapsed. The museum director, who had been standing near a marble column with a glass of champagne, went pale. Reporters shifted closer. Phones rose higher. Carlo's eyes narrowed, but he could not stop the room from turning. Mara had not screamed assassin. She had not shouted poison. She had done something far more useful. She had given the crowd a drama they understood. Dante stepped beside her, as if insulted on behalf of his investment. "Careful, Mara," he said, his voice low and smooth for the audience, though there was a dark current beneath it meant only for her. "That accusation costs more than the painting." She did not look at him. "Then the truth is finally priced correctly." A few people murmured in admiration. The auctioneer began to protest, but Mara moved closer to the frame and pointed to a line of shadow near the lower corner. She spoke with the cool authority of a woman who had built her reputation by humiliating liars, with evidence they never saw coming. The pigment was wrong. The aging was forced. The provenance had a gap no honest collector would ignore. The signature had been restored too cleanly, like someone had painted history over a wound and hoped money would make everyone blind. Dante played along perfectly. He questioned the museum director. He demanded records. He let his irritation fill the space where fear should have been. Together, they moved step by step away from the center of the gallery, wrapped inside the storm Mara had created. Every eye followed them. Even Carlo had to follow carefully, because too much pressure now would make him look guilty before the trap had sprung. The waiter reached Dante's side at the wrong moment and offered the whiskey. Dante took it, but before the rim could reach his mouth, Mara turned sharply, as if reacting to a comment from the auctioneer. Her elbow brushed his wrist. The glass fell. Amber liquid struck the marble and spread like a dark stain, the sharp crack of crystal breaking cut through the room. Dante looked down at the spilled drink, then at Mara. Above them, hidden gears groaned. The skylight shattered too early. A terrible silver rain crashed down where Dante had been standing moments before. Screams tore through the gallery. People surged backward. Glass exploded across the marble in flashing shards. The music stopped. The auctioneer vanished behind his podium. Security guards shouted over one another as the elegant room became a storm of fear and falling light. Mara did not wait to see who had been cut. She grabbed Dante's sleeve and pulled him through the narrow arch behind the portrait wall, into a restricted corridor, lined with covered frames and locked doors. For once, the most feared man in New York let someone lead him. His body was tense beside hers, armed with violence and ready to use it. But Mara knew the museum better than the men hunting them. She knew the old freight routes. She knew which restoration doors had weak locks. She knew which cameras had been replaced and which were only for show. Behind them, Carlo's voice cut through the chaos, no longer smooth, no longer loyal. Dante heard it too. Mara turned down a dim corridor where the air smelled of dust, varnish, and old stone. Her heart was pounding now, heavy and human, but her mind stayed bright. The auction was behind them. The trap had failed. but failure made desperate men louder, faster, and more willing to burn down everything they had planned to own. Dante caught her wrist, stopping her just before the corridor split in two. His grip was firm, but not cruel. His dark eyes searched her face, and for the first time since she had known him, there was no command in them, only realization. "You knew," he said. Mara pulled in a slow breath, listening to the thunder of footsteps growing closer behind them. "I noticed," she said. Something almost like wonder moved through his face, brief and dangerous. Then a gunshot cracked somewhere beyond the wall, and the softness vanished. Mara turned toward the left passage, where the lights were lower and the museum's secrets ran deeper. "Then keep noticing," Dante said quietly. And together they disappeared into the hidden heart of the museum, while the kingdom above them shattered into panic. The left passage swallowed them in a colder kind of darkness. The noise from the auction faded behind the thick stone walls, but it did not disappear. It followed them like a storm trapped in another room. Screams echoed through the vents. Alarms began to pulse in slow red flashes along the ceiling. Somewhere behind them, Carlo's men were moving through the museum, no longer pretending to be guests, no longer hiding their purpose behind pressed suits and polite smiles. The trap had failed, but a failed trap was sometimes more dangerous than a perfect one, because desperate men stopped caring how much damage they left behind. Mara kept walking fast, one hand trailing along the wall as she counted the doors by memory. She had seen this part of the museum only once, years ago, during an insurance review that everyone else had treated like dull paperwork. To Mara, paperwork had always been a map of hidden truth. Every invoice, every storage note, every repair bill told a story if someone had the patience to listen. The museum's public halls were grand and bright, but the real body of the place lived back here, in narrow corridors where old frames leaned against walls, crates waited under dust covers, and priceless things were moved in silence before dawn. Dante stayed close beside her, his anger held tightly under his skin. He was not used to being led. He was not used to running from danger instead of turning toward it. Yet he did not argue. Not now. Not after the whiskey had shattered on the floor. Not after the skylight had fallen like a bright, deadly rain, exactly where he had been standing. He had built his life on reading men, but Mara had read the room itself. Every lock, every light, every wrong breath. That kind of mind did not shout for attention. It waited, watched, and saved kings before they knew they were already dead. They reached a locked service door, painted the same grey as the wall. Mara bent near the keypad, her earrings trembling softly as footsteps sounded somewhere far behind them. Dante reached under his jacket, but she shook her head without looking at him. There was a camera over the door, old model, museum grade, not criminal grade. She had seen the maintenance contract. She knew the system reset after a blackout. Her fingers moved over the keypad with calm speed, entering the emergency override code used by night conservators during power failures. For half a second, nothing happened. Then, the lock clicked. Dante looked at her with a sharp flash of surprise. Mara pushed the door open. You would be amazed what people leave in insurance files. They slipped into a restoration lab washed in pale blue light. The room smelled of clean chemicals, paper, old canvas, and cold air. Long tables held half-restored paintings under soft lamps. Tiny brushes rested beside glass dishes. A cracked marble saint watched them from a padded stand, one hand missing, his stone face peaceful in a way that felt almost cruel. This was a place built for patience, a place where damaged things were handled gently and slowly brought back from ruin. Mara had just enough time to shut the door behind them before a shadow crossed the narrow window in the corridor. Dante pulled her behind him. His body moved with the dark certainty of a man who had survived more violence than he would ever speak about, but Mara touched his arm, stopping him. Across the lab, beyond the work tables, stood a sealed archive room. It was used for fragile paintings, temperature-controlled and reinforced, built to protect art from fire, moisture, smoke, and careless hands. Mara remembered the system notes. Once sealed from the outside, the archive could not be opened from the inside until the pressure cycle completed. The door behind them burst inward. Two of Carlo's men came through with guns raised. Their eyes found Dante first, because men like that always looked for the obvious threat. They did not look at Mara until she had already moved. She grabbed a heavy rolling cart loaded with storage cases and shoved it hard into the first man's knees. He stumbled into the second, and Dante crossed the space like a shadow made solid. The struggle lasted only seconds, rough and breathless and close. One gun hit the floor and spun under a table. The other man staggered backward, trying to recover, and Mara did the only thing that made sense. She ran to the archive control panel and slammed her palm against the emergency seal. The archive door opened with a soft hiss. Dante understood instantly. He drove both men back, not with wild rage, but with clean force, pushing them toward the open room. One of them tried to lunge at Mara. She did not scream. She picked up a metal frame clamp and struck the control panel again, triggering the fire protection cycle. The archive doors began sliding shut. Dante stepped away at the last second, pulling Mara with him. The two men hit the sealed glass as the room locked around them. Their fists pounded against the reinforced door. Their shouts were muffled by the thick seal. A white mist poured from the vents inside. Not smoke, but cold vapor meant to protect old canvases during a fire alert. Within moments, the men were trapped in a freezing, sealed room, alive but helpless, their threats fading behind glass. Dante stared at the trapped men, then slowly turned to Mara. His face held something deeper than admiration now, something unsettled, something almost reverent. "You locked them in a painting freezer," he said quietly. Mara smoothed one hand over her gown, though her fingers were shaking. "Climate-sealed archive," she corrected, "and they should be fine in 20 minutes. Uncomfortable, but fine." A slow smile touched his mouth. It was not warm, exactly. Dante Moretti did not seem like a man built for warmth, but it changed his face. It made him look less like a statue carved from threat, and more like a man waking up inside his own danger. "Remind me never to bore you," he said. "There are worse crimes than boring me." Apparently, the faint humor between them lasted only a breath. Then Mara heard voices through the walls, more men moving closer, and she headed for the back of the lab. They passed through a narrow prep room and down a stairwell that spiraled beneath the museum. The air grew cooler with every step. Above them was the world of donors, cameras, and velvet ropes. Below was the hidden world that kept beauty alive. Crates, tunnels, freight elevators, private storage rooms, and sealed passageways used to move art no one wanted the public to see. The underground storage level stretched ahead in dim rows of metal shelving and wooden crates stamped with museum codes. Some were small enough to hold sketches, others were large enough to hide cars, bodies, or old secrets. Mara led Dante between them, her breath steady even as her chest rose and fell from the long escape. Her burgundy gown brushed against the concrete floor, and one strap of her heel had begun to cut into her ankle, but she ignored it. Pain was just information. She had trained herself to sort useful information from noise. Dante caught her hand when they reached a crossing between two tunnels. "How long have you known about Carlo?" Mara stopped. The red alarm lights moved across her face in slow waves. Long enough to be worried, not long enough to stop tonight before it started. His jaw tightened. "Tell me." She looked down the tunnel, listening. No footsteps yet. They had a little time, and he deserved the truth before the final door opened. "Carlo has been stealing from you for months. Not in the simple way foolish men steal. He used fake art purchases, private gallery transfers, offshore buyers, shell collectors, and donation accounts. Small movements hidden inside large ones. Nothing obvious alone, but together they made a shape." Dante's eyes darkened. "How much?" "Enough to buy loyalty. Enough to make promises to the Belandi family. Enough to tell them he could hand them parts of your territory once you were gone." The name Belandi moved through Dante like a blade pulled from its sheath. His whole body went still. The Belandis were old rivals with clean hands in public and dirty roots under the city. They had wanted Moretti territory for years, but wanting was different from touching. Carlo had given them a way in. "He was going to sell my house while I was still inside it," Dante said. Yes, Mara answered softly, but he needed you dead before the transfers could be traced back to him. He thought the museum would help hide the murder and the money at the same time. A tragic accident, a confused security system, a forged painting scandal to distract the press. He planned for everything except being noticed. Dante looked at her for a long moment. And you noticed. I always notice money when it gets nervous. He almost smiled, but the hurt behind his eyes was too strong. Mara saw it then, buried beneath all that power. Dante was not shaken by the stolen millions. Men like him could lose money and make it back before sunrise. What cut him was trust. Carlo had stood beside him, eaten at his table, spoken for him in rooms where silence could be deadly. Betrayal was not new in Dante's world, but that did not make it painless. It only made him better at hiding where it landed. Mara's voice softened. I didn't wait for permission. His eyes lifted to hers. During the security blackout, I used the museum network to reroute the fake art payments. Carlo's name is now attached to every forged transaction, every shell collector, every false gallery purchase. I also sent the Belandi laundering structure to a federal contact who owes me a favor from an old fraud case. By now, their lawyers are sweating, their accountants are deleting files, and their phones are probably being watched. Whatever Carlo thinks is waiting for him outside this museum, it is already burning. Dante stared at her, as if the alarms, the tunnel, the men hunting them, and the whole city above had gone silent. You destroyed his coup before I knew there was a coup. I slowed it down, Mara said. You still have to survive him. Something passed between them then, quiet and heavy. Dante had always been a man other people feared, but Mara had not saved him by becoming louder, harder, or crueler than the men around him. She had saved him by being exact, patient, careful. She had taken every insult people had ever placed on her body, every room where she had been dismissed as too large, too quiet, too easy to ignore, and turned that invisibility into a weapon no one had seen coming. A shot cracked down the tunnel. Concrete chipped from the wall near Dante's shoulder. He pulled Mara behind a stack of crates, his arm firm around her waist. More footsteps rushed closer. Carlo's remaining men were driving them toward the loading bay. Mara knew the layout well enough to understand there was no better path. The bay was ahead, wide and open, with freight doors leading out to the service street. It was also where Carlo would be waiting, because traitors liked exits. They liked to stand near escape and call it victory. Dante checked his weapon with a cold, practiced motion. Mara looked at his face, at the calm rage there, and felt a soft fear move through her. Not fear of him, fear for him. It surprised her, how deep it went. Dante Moretti was not gentle. He was not safe in the way ordinary men were supposed to be safe. But in the last hour, he had trusted her in a world where trust was nearly extinct, and that trust had changed the air between them. They moved together into the loading bay. The space opened wide around them, lit by harsh overhead lamps and the flashing red spill of the alarm system. Tall stacks of art crates stood in rows near the freight doors. A cold draft slipped in from somewhere outside, carrying the distant sound of sirens. Carlo Renzi stood near the center of the bay with 4 men around him. His suit was still perfect. His hair was still smooth. Only his eyes had changed. They were too bright now, restless with a victory he had not yet realized was dead. "Dante," Carlo called, spreading his hands as if greeting an old friend. "You should have drunk the whiskey. It would have been cleaner." Dante stepped forward, his body between Carlo and Mara. "You always did prefer clean hands." Carlo's mouth twitched. Someone had to think beyond blood and pride. The Belandis understand the future. You were getting old-fashioned, too loyal to old rules, too sentimental about old names. You sold me for borrowed money. "I bought a future," Carlo snapped. Then his gaze slid to Mara, and his face twisted with open disgust. "And I almost had it until your bookkeeper decided to play queen for the night." Mara stepped out from behind Dante. Dante's hand shifted as if to stop her, but he did not. He let her stand beside him, not behind him, beside him. Carlo laughed once, sharp and ugly. "Look at you, still pretending you belong in the center of the room. Mara met his eyes calmly. Her heart was racing, but her voice did not shake. You never understood the center of the room, Carlo. You only understood where men with guns were standing. His smile faltered. The Belandi accounts are exposed, she continued. Their gallery network is already compromised. The offshore collector you used in Zurich now carries your signature trail. The museum transfers, the fake restoration invoices, the shell donations, every one of them points back to you. The money you stole is no longer waiting for you. The family you betrayed Dante for will be too busy trying to save themselves to answer your calls. Carlo stared at her. For the first time all night, he looked truly afraid. No, he said, but the word had no strength. Mara tilted her head. You mistook silence for emptiness. That was your mistake. The loading bay changed in that instant. Carlo's men looked at him, just briefly, but briefly was enough. Loyalty built on money always trembled when the money vanished. Dante moved in that crack of hesitation. His men had not been as far away as Carlo believed. 2 Moretti guards emerged from the side freight passage, having followed the chaos down from the upper level. The fight that followed was fast and fierce, a burst of movement and noise between the crates. Mara backed toward the wall, one hand pressed to her chest, watching shadows collide beneath the red lights. She did not look away, not this time. Carlo tried to run. Dante caught him near the freight doors and slammed him hard against a stack of empty frames. Carlo gasped, all polish gone, all charm stripped away. He looked smaller without his plan. Men like him often did. Dante held him there, not shouting, not losing control. His anger was too deep for noise. You could have come for me, Dante said. You could have come for my money, my territory, even my name, but you stood in the same room as Mara Voss and thought she was the weak point. Carlo's eyes flicked toward her, with hate and fear tangled together. Dante leaned closer. That was the stupidest thing you ever did. By the time museum security and the first wave of federal agents reached the underground bay, Carlo was on his knees, alive, ruined, and surrounded by proof he could not explain. The sirens grew louder outside. Radios crackled. Men shouted. The grand auction above had become a scandal that would swallow half the city's powerful guests before morning. The forged painting would be only the first headline. The second would be bigger. The Belandi family's art laundering network would start to fall before sunrise. Dante stood among the crates and broken glass, his suit torn at one sleeve, a thin line of blood at his temple, his face unreadable as agents swarmed the far end of the bay. No one touched him, not yet, maybe not ever. Men like Dante lived in the spaces between proof and fear, but his eyes were not on the agents, or Carlo, or the flashing lights. They were on Mara. She stood near a crate marked with a museum seal, her burgundy gown dusty at the hem, her hair loosened around her face, one heel broken, one hand still curled around the small museum access card she had used to keep them alive. She looked nothing like the woman people had dismissed at the edge of the room. Or maybe she looked exactly like her, and that was the part that mattered. She had not transformed into someone else. She had simply stopped letting the world decide what her quiet meant. Dante walked to her slowly. For the first time since she had known him, he seemed careful, not uncertain, careful, as if he understood that she was not an object to claim, not a prize to display, not an employee to command. She was the person who had seen death forming in the lights above him, and had stepped into the spotlight before it could fall. Mara, he said, her name low in his voice. She looked up at him. You should get that cut looked at. I should have listened to you sooner. You listened when it mattered. No, he said. I looked at you for months and saw brilliance when it was useful to me. Tonight I saw the rest. The words settled between them, quiet as dust. Around them, the city's underworld cracked open. Carlo was dragged away. Reporters shouted from somewhere outside the sealed freight doors. The old museum groaned above them, wounded but still standing. Dante lifted his hand, then stopped before touching her face, giving her the choice in a way no one expected from him. Mara stepped closer. His fingers brushed her cheek, gentle, despite everything those hands had done. Every man in that room thought power was fear, he said. Weapons, names, blood. You let them believe that until the exact second it destroyed them. Mara's breath caught, not from fear now, but from the strange wonder of being understood by the most dangerous man in the city. Power is timing, she whispered. Dante's thumb traced the soft curve of her cheek. Power is you. He kissed her then, not like a king rewarding loyalty, and not like a man taking what he believed was owed. He kissed her like surrender, like recognition, like a vow spoken without witnesses. Mara felt the cold of the loading bay, the distant sirens, the sting in her ankle, the tremble in her hands, and beneath all of it, the steady pull of something she had been denying, since the first time Dante Moretti looked at her, and did not look away. When he drew back, his forehead rested lightly against hers. The city beyond the freight doors was already changing. Carlo's betrayal would become a warning. The Bellandis would spend years trying to recover from the damage Mara had done in minutes. The donors upstairs would return to their mansions and pretend they had never seen the underworld bleed through the marble. But Dante knew the truth, and so did Mara. The most dangerous person in the museum had never been the man with the gun, or the traitor with the perfect smile, or the king standing beneath the glass. It had been the fat woman at the edge of the room, the one everyone looked past, the one who saw every pattern before it became a grave. She had saved the king, broken the betrayal, and moved the whole board without raising her voice. By morning, New York would still fear Dante Moretti, but Dante would know better. New York had a queen now, and she had been watching all along.